Yes, we are running a bit behind, but not not very much. But we'll try to finish like with the other session, uh, throwing a question to the to the panelists and then opening up to the floor. Um, I think it's very difficult to summarize all that has been said over the last 5 or 6 panels, but just wanted to share. I mean, I think that we all discussed, the idea, some questions about who defines open, and how we should define it in an inclusive way. Okay, sure, but do we have to adopt like a more principle-based approach, or maybe a process-based definition, or should we uh, focus on some specific requirements that need to be there from substantive perspective? I think all these are open questions, and it seems that we have potentially proliferation of alternative frameworks. So the challenge there, I think, is how we can try to build an integrated approach, at least a framework that minimizes the tension, the incompatibility, the problems of inconsistencies. And for instance, something that was discussed is just in this last presentation, distributed power, right? One person having control over everything. Maybe this shouldn't be part of the definition of open source, or open artificial intelligence. Maybe yes, some things about the resources of people, how effectively they're able to use what is being shared. That's also something that creates a hurdle for effective implementation. So in the end, what we can do to promote an integrated approach. On one hand, public procurement was also mentioned as a potential nudge that could foster good practices, the adoption of good practices, and we can think about other types of nudges also that that obtain similar effects. I mean, this one was also a good suggestion. If we can identify the values, we can even nudge states to adopt these frameworks. But yes, basically trying to pick your brain on what we could do to improve the consistency of all these parallel efforts that are going on. I think this is an overarching question that is relevant for all of us. So I would start maybe from the middle here. um, I don't actually. There's no specific order that we need to follow. If anybody wants to offer some suggestion on how to build some more cohesion and integrated approach, that would be very welcome. I think Kalen or Ettore, who wants to speak first?
No,
Ettore.
Keelan, you go. No, I prefer to speak as the first one because I have an accent that is Italian. Where are you from? You're Scottish German, so he has an accent that is magnificent. So that's why I prefer to speak a little bit before, just not to be put a shame on myself. So may I, Kaylin? Thank you very much. Nothing. The question is very difficult, very complex, I believe, but touch upon a very important, the core issue. So I try to express this idea in my presentation with the involvement of the different operators, the different stakeholders, the famous stakeholders. So, for example, as well, the judges have to be involved in the knowledge of open source, how open source and AI works, because that's the way. An accountability, if not a responsibility of the judges in the operation, in the procedure. They don't know, it's impossible that they have engineeristic approach and engineeristic knowledge, but as well something to know, something to operate and to operate in a more accountable way. That's the first point. The second point that is very important in my opinion is as well an idea of sustainability that we have to adopt in this way. Today we didn't speak about sustainability as far as I saw, but if we consider the 17 SDG, the Sustainable Development Goal, and in my opinion, open source as well, according to what Kasia described so far very properly, and as well WAG. Your name, sorry, Wayne.
Way.
Wayne. Sorry, Wayne. Yes, I have to remember John Wayne, and I remember. So, with a different spelling, probably. So, in this case, we spoke about energy, and sustainability is something related as well to energy and the open source, data center, and so forth. So, the involvement of stakeholders is something very, very important in my humble opinion. And to answer as well the second question that you posed, that was the first one, how to describe open source? Well, we cannot use a very precise description and notion of open source because it's very risky. That's what Wade tried, but in my opinion, the whole approach can be a risk assessment. So a description of open source in this idea. So the risks that open source can create, probably, like AI Act did.
Thank you, Ettore, for also trying to bring together some of the contributions. Kellen, do you want to add that?
Yeah, just push here. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, my point won't be as elaborate as yours, Ettore, but it's just at the intersection of the observations we made in our research project and comments you were making, Marco, which is that there are lots of different communities of practice involved in kind of open AI or open source AI. And one thing that we saw in interviewing developers is that they felt that there were lots of divisions between different communities of practice. Those that could say that they were open source AI developers and those that were not open source AI developers. And a lot of this division came from, disagreements about how to define open source AI and so on. And those are really, really important. Those were really important discussions, and it's really important to combat open washing when it comes to licenses in particular. But to answer your question, in the interest of kind of building bridges between these different communities of practice, I think there's maybe something that could be done to, I don't know, maybe this sounds naive, but make those folks who work on open data, like Kasia was discussing, those that develop open source frameworks for training LLMs, and those that are involved in open benchmarking of open LLMs, for example. And of course, open source AI or open AI is much bigger than open LLMs. But we need to think about building bridges between these communities of practice, which have different skill sets, different norms, different practices, different interests, but who are all kind of involved in this kind of in the space. So, yeah.
I didn't see in your presentation. I would want these bridges will be across different phases. So the post development, the pre-training, the post-training, and the last phase, the diffusion, or they will be stronger within each phase.
Yeah, good question. I think it would, throughout. So I wouldn't kind of bucket it by phase, but there are clearly different stakeholders contributing, participating at different stages, or participating in the development of open technologies that are used in different stages. But what they all have in common is that they contribute in some way to the development of open AI artifacts or open source AI artifacts.
Okay, thank you. Any more reactions? Please.
So,
Renata.
So I'm going to do a very quick observation, but the discussion about the definition of openness. And perhaps we also need to ask something among ourselves, that's why do we need this definition, right? What do we want from achieving a definition or updated definition? And this is not going to be a very new answer. We can look from past experience, right? What we achieved with having an open source definition, and I think we have clear benefits from it. But I think we also need to understand from the process that happened over these last decades is that openness has been produced and negotiated, and it has been since then. We have had some mechanisms that has stabilized that meaning of openness, which has brought benefits, but it is also intention, right? It is also being produced and negotiate it, because it's not really a technical definition, right? It's not simple to say this is open because it does that or something else. No, it's a social process as well, right? It's a epistemic process among different communities of practice, different academic, civil society organizations. So in some way, I think some development from our discussions here can be also acknowledging what we want to achieve, what is our agenda, what are our normative commitments, right? We can be honest among ourselves as well to say, we think that openness is something like that, and we want to negotiate and try to produce this type of openness. And we have been discussing so many ideas, right? I think Cassia mentioned ideas of transparency, control, documentation. These are not normative commitments that might be productive as well to acknowledge and produce and try to negotiate out there.
I see a role there for academia to bring visibility to these practices and communities, and that's what you guys are doing. So very good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, adding to that, and it connects really well. I wanted to share very quickly an anecdote. You know, like when we were bringing connectivity for the first time to villages in Guatemala, the first thing that the people in the village will do is to search about the village. They wanted to make sure that the name of the village was mentioned there, that something of them was on it for a reason of belonging and being part of something larger than themselves. So why this story? Because I think that a good test for openness, given the past experience and the giants that we are battling now, is something that preserves innovation, allows anyone to understand it. I mean, you don't have to be have 2 PhDs to do it. Distributes benefits, and not only economic benefits, social benefits, cultural benefits, and so on. Makes enable us to spot risks quickly and fix them in a distributed manner. Makes reduce accountability frictions, so you are not in a jurisdiction that you are so shielded that I can never get you, or you are not so protected by laws that will make it impossible. So how can we design to reduce these accountability frictions? Respects planetary boundaries, because one of the lies that I remember, like we were repeating like as parrots in the 2000s was, oh, it's digital, so the cost is 0. I can create 1,000 copies and it will cost nothing. And it was like, it happened like a magic, you know, and it stayed in the imagination of people. So now we saw that, you know, creating 1,000 copies of the Britney Spears song that we are pirating had a cost and a physical representation. So that's very important. And lastly, that is participatory. Like, you know, like, okay, I don't need to be an engineer, but I can, at least in a practical exercise, go back to you and tell you, you know, you didn't get it right. My village is not here. And you got this wrong model, you know, like, so I'm going to contribute and shape it in a way. Even if you're a private actor, give me a right to participate and be part of this. So my knowledge is not erased, my self exists in the systems that are going to shape the future. And lastly, highlight the importance of research. Research and practice being shared, you know, research shapes, these spaces are very rare. I mean, it really doesn't, we are like, you know, battling monsters that we do not understand well. But more importantly, we are not creating the agenda that we want to to put forward to replace the monsters. For example, questions like the cost that Astor asked. We don't have the answers. So if today I'm sitting with the Ethiopian public library and they want to digitize everything and they want to do an experiment, but how much? I don't know. So we need quick answers to make this a living reality, not just a definition that is debated because of a comma.
And more research. Great. Always happy with that. Please, Kasia.
I'm really bad with technology today. Very shortly, just to that, because actually we asked ourselves that question at the beginning of the convening, and we had Mitchell Baker giving the intro and drawing the parallels to the early days of open source, where where the communities were very fragmented as well. And there was a lot of controversy, conflicts, and so on. And she said that one thing that actually brings people together are artifacts. So creating artifacts, reference points that people can relate to, that embody the values, is something that even despite the different opinions and the conflicts and so on, creates like a bigger sense of belonging and movement.
Great. Yes, so practice is also important.
Yes, I think. Yes, my idea is that let's just, keep the definition of openness open-ended. That because I tried to understand why folks are complaining about the definition of open source AI, just because we can change it dynamically and periodically. That's reason. Actually, when we were making the draft of model AI law in China, we aided a kind of article relating to policy adaptability assessment. And basically, would ask the legislator or regulator to assess the policy environment periodically, so that we can change the definition of open source AI as per the kind of the current or ongoing contexts. In this regard, I think probably when it comes to the openness of open source AI, probably we can adopt a kind of experimentalist approach. Start it first, but in a very open way, and then change it in a very open way as well.
Okay, thank you all for the very insightful answers. Now, we don't have much time, but I'm conscious that you have an opportunity here to ask the questions that you didn't manage to ask throughout the whole day. I see there's already one hand up. If there's any other brave, please. So let's start with the closer one.
Yes, super brief. So first, let me say that I think absolutely good to discuss the definitions, open-ended, etc. But let's keep in mind that definitions can also get worse if they're open-ended. Sticking to something, making sure it's binary, we have seen that as well. Trying to introduce, let's say, patents into the open source definition in that space as well. It's been a long-standing fight, and holding the line in binary might be very important. So my instinct around this is very strongly that any definition around openness and AI needs to be a binary. I don't like shades, I don't like degrees. I like a binary. But of course, then you have the nature of things having more gray zones. Then I wonder, do you think that there's any benefit to changing the perspective and start talking about degrees of closeness instead? So we have a binary open, and then people can present what they are having that is closed.
Yes, actually, I think I can briefly give a very quick answer from a very personal perspective. I think when drafting the definition of open source AI in our kind of model AI law, actually we keep that as sort of, the binary very weak, so that the stakeholders can choose to what extent they disclose their data or something. But we have to ensure that the stakeholder ensure that the freedom of reuse and access or something. We ensure the rights, but we keep the kind of disclosure obligation quite open-ended. I think that's kind of tiered approach to designing institutions, just because you have to offer incentives as well, right? You always give the offer kind of regulations, but also you have to offer incentives as regulations, and it's sort of a very kind of dynamic process. That's the reason I think we have to assess it dynamically as well.
I said this is a great question for the social part. I think we can talk a lot about it. Let's take the second question then. If you want, Kellan, I saw that you have an impulse. In the meantime, you can...
Yeah, just really quick, and it's related to the point we were making in our presentation related to Llama and cases when developers were not able to use Llama based on where they are. And I think it's really important to point out examples like that to show that is clearly not open source.
Yeah.
And that's why having a clear definition of open source is important.
Say hi to Meta. Please, there.
I think I'll probably stay in this middle. And I want to come back to what Renata was talking about, the definition, the open definition being perhaps biased by a white, northern, Western European point of view. And I think, sorry to single you out, Astor, but you're the perfect example. You want a clear definition. And maybe the word definition is the problem here, because a definition is a definitive, something that defines, that creates an end, a thing, a finito to something. And I think if we want to be more open, more social, more political, maybe we can work with many versions, echoing Arturo Escobar and pluriverse, the pluriverse. So we can have an open definition, we can have open declarations, we can have open manifestos, and each of them would have a different purpose. So the idea of having a definition that would encompass all of the discussion in a single definition, to me, it's a bit too much for what the definition can do. And maybe we can think of many ways to approach the idea of openness that would not be only about having a definition. And that's not a question.
Okay.
Renata, did you want to respond briefly?
Very quickly, the problem that we have with that is that it doesn't take off as standard, and then it, like opportunistically, I know that the companies will go to the jurisdiction that has like the most convenient, that fits the purpose of the big guy who can, go jurisdiction shopping. And I think there is some strength in precision, and I think that I see the point of that, that the advantage of the open definition strength was that it was so crystal clear that lots of people adopted it, and it led to actually many of the data sets that are now training real open models. And so that's the problem, that as discussion is very important, because these open discussions will lead to elements that we haven't considered, but as standard is tricky because, the moment that it opens a Pandora box and it makes us weaker because it makes us disperse. So there's a pros and cons.
Okay, I think we can call it a day. It's been a marathon. We've learned a lot. So first of all, let's thank the speakers here. Thank you. Thanks all of you for staying until so late. I think